Hey everybody, and welcome back to Guardbeardia. This is Chapter 4 of the Emily Braun series that we're returning with, since I'm back from vacation, which I was only going to be gone a week from. You made it sound like I was going to be gone for a whole month, but I'm back. And we'll continue doing the Emily Braun series as long as you guys like listening to it. So, presenting Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The Balder Battalion. When it came to dates, Emily had experienced far worse than Ogledock. Not that she could call it a date in the romantic term, but more of an outing with a friend. Fan. Boss. Whatever. They had frozen yogurt together, and he rode around in her sidecar. Tootie had been at the same place that Ogledock had the coupons to, and she quickly inserted herself into their little twosome. Ogledock, Emily could tell, found Tootie to be a nuisance, as the elf constantly made references to changelings and how much of a problem they were in her dimension. Whenever she brought it up, Ogledock's eyes and face splotches would ripple with warm hues as he fought to suppress his annoyance and anger, while Emily would just laugh politely and talk with Tootie. There was, however, one comment that caused Ogledock to stop radiating red and orange as if he were trying to mimic a bonfire. Tootie had just finished off her cup of pineapple and chocolate swirl when she pulled out her spoon and gestured towards Ogledock.
I'll say one thing, though. Changeling boys are small enough that you can shove them under your bed if your mother comes calling. But they aren't small where it counts, since they can change at will. You know what I'm saying, kid?
Emily raised a brow before looking over at Ogledock, who had his face in his hands, while his elbows were resting on the table. She had never seen him turn shades of pink and purple before. But she could make a guess from the posture that there must be unpleasant emotions warping through his flesh and brain. Emily blew out a laugh, a short pfft coming out from her lips as she fought to keep it civil, and Ogledock dragged his hands down his face, pulling at his eyes and mouth in mortification. I would be too. His voice was dark as he growled out a response, one of his hands coming up to brush along his hair. You elves truly are a blight, no matter the realm. Tootie apparently felt nothing at the dig, just wrinkling her nose as she tinkled laughter his way. Before Ogledock could break out his mother tongue to lash Tootie in front of Emily, the elf bounced up, wrapped herself in her bomber jacket, and made her way out the frozen yogurt bar, the high heels of her boots clicking all the way out the door. Ogledock didn't stop radiating purple and pink hues the entire way back to the company, and Emily didn't think it was a good idea to poke fun at him with Tootie having done the heavy lifting in that department. When they pulled into a parking spot, the Zundap's engine churring down to a stop when she killed the ignition, Ogledock ripped off his helmet and made to get out. He had managed to swing one leg over when Emily leaned forward on the handlebars of her bike, taking off her helmet while chewing over a thought. She spoke up softly, trying to make her voice as light and friendly as possible. Thank you for the yogurt, Oggy. Ogledock seized before he could swing the other leg over, and looked back at Emily. Unfortunately for him, the sun was just beginning to set in the background, and was casting Emily's form in a golden light, while also causing her hair to glow and burn the brightest red. Of course, this also meant that her emerald green eyes were glowing just as bright, and the sight almost caused Ogledock to stumble over his words.
It's nothing. Glad you, enjoyed. I need to get some paperwork done, so I'll just head inside. You can put your motorbike in the vehicle hangar if you want.
Emily let him grab onto the door handle before she spoke up again, crossing her arms over the handlebars with a cheeky grin. So is what Tootie said true? Absolutely not! He roared before whipping the door open and closing it swiftly behind him. Even through the metal he could hear Emily's laughter, and she could see the rainbow of colors flaring through the small window in the door. She didn't like teasing the changeling, but he just made it so darn easy. Keeping the bike in the vehicle hangar did sound like a good idea, though, as she doubted they made a bike slip as wide as her Zundap, and wrapping it in a tarp was just going to be a major hassle. Putting the gearbox in reverse, she pulled out of the spot and then went around the rear of the company building where the vehicle hangar sat. Here there were extraordinary vehicles that the company had accrued over the time they had been operating, sporting things from lifted trucks with mounted machine guns to retrofitted ambulances that ran off blood.
What?
These were seen as valuable, and thus not just parked out in front of the lot. She saw a spot between two heavy vehicles and backed in between them, making sure she was near the front so nothing would just back into her bike. To her left was something that made her swear it was an M577 personnel carrier, except it had 6 tires and sported a turret on the front, top, and rear. To her right was a huge monobike, a vehicle that had a single large outer wheel, while on the inside was the seat, controls, and other elements that made the bike work. As she hopped off her bike and dusted off the seat, she could hear a light metallic tapping from somewhere, and walked around the side of the monobike, which, judging from the writing on it, was named the Harlot. On the other side, she found Jamesha working on what looked like a highly advanced gyroscope, and was tapping his teeth with his tongue as he studied it. Emily squatted down next to the big metal man, who was doing a perfect Slav squat, and jabbed him with her elbow.
"This is one of yours, huh?"
His slightly metallic voice was quiet, but she could tell he was speaking in a friendly tone.
She is an old friend of mine. Carried me through the Conrad excursions, and kept me alive during the run through the Heilgard Gate.
Emily nodded solemnly with her eyes closed, then opened them. "I don't know what any of those things are." Jamesha hissed quietly in laughter before closing the door on the gyroscope access, then closing the next armored door of the main panel. Emily had slowly learned that when he hissed, he was laughing, and it had caused her many a spook before she learned the ins and outs of Jamesha.
I was part of the Balder Battalion. I used to be a man. But when my organic frame was beyond repair, I was able to be recovered and my brain placed into our Bargada Yakofut Mark III. Your science fiction speaks of something similar, something called a dreadnought, if you know the comparison. Our job was to ride machines like the Harlot and act as a forward element to the main combat body.
Jamesha patted the side of the Harlot with his metal hand affectionately.
It is hard to find ammunition here. I have to make it myself most days, but her particle cannons and pulse repeaters serve me well while on the dive.
Emily leaned in and looked at the artistic-looking pipes that jutted out of small pods near the main body of the monobike, and gave them a little tap. "Huh. Any more of you guys running around here?" Jamesha stared at his bike for a few moments, unblinking, silent, before his neck whirred and looked down at Emily.
Just scanned. Still seem to be the only one here. We were on a glorious final charge, straight into the heart of the Malgord main fortress, when I was swallowed by an anomaly and spat out near some place called Calgary.
"Calgary's nice." Jamesha nodded, his metallic skull glinting in the light.
It was nice. They were not mad when I leveled a small building in a panic. Since then, I have been doing this, in the hopes I can maybe find my way back to my brothers in Bleeding Steel.
Emily wasn't sure what to say, so instead fell on an old standby question. "So, do you eat, or whatever?"
Well, I don't have to, as I can plug into a power system. But I must say, I enjoy a good butter curry.
It was weird, since he technically could not smile, but something in how he tilted his head and the tone of his voice made it seem like he was, and she smiled back in return. For a few minutes he explained the Harlot to her, how she was used and driven, top speed, all that good stuff. Before it began to fizzle rain outside of the vehicle hangar, Emily had been sitting on top of the knockoff M577's front deck plate while Jamesha showed her how far the wheel could tilt, which was quite impressive, almost being able to go full horizontal, when she saw the rain. "Hey, Tin Man, let's get inside before it starts raining harder. I don't feel like drying out my boots." Jamesha looked up from his seat and stared out into the sky, and Emily could just see the faintest flickering in the glow of his eyes.
Heavy storm front. I believe you are right. Allow me.
He righted the Harlot and hopped out of the control seat before striding over to a small locker and pulling out a long silver shaft. He gave the thumb switch a toggle and a bright shimmering light whirled around the tip, creating a smooth dome above him. Emily stood next to him and they began to walk out of the hangar, which Jamesha then clicked his teeth and the doors began to close automatically. "Alexa, please close the doors," Emily said with a chuckle, and Jamaica began to hiss along with her.
Alexa is inferior to the Jamaica.
Emily laughed openly and smacked the front of his chest with the back of her hand, and he hissed a little louder with her. The two's boots thudded wetly on the ground as they walked together, and Emily held her hand out of the strange umbrella's cover, letting the soft rain wet her hand. "So whose fancy gadget is this?" Jamaica didn't hiss, and his voice took on a strange, hollowish tone.
It was my mother's.
Emily closed her eyes in mental anguish as her lips twisted, having accidentally stepped on that landmine with both feet. However, Jamaica's free steel hand lightly patted her shoulder, and she looked up into his glowing eyes.
It is okay. You could not know. She was a lovely woman, and always liked to walk in the rain. I bought her this before I left for training, and she left it to me when I outlived her. Don't worry, it is a happy memory overall, when I use it.
Emily hooked his arm in hers, and she blew out a breath. "Sentimental clanker." She was rewarded with a quiet hiss of laughter as they both made their way across the expansive back lot of the company, and the rain continued to fall around them and fill their ears with the sound of it hitting the metal roofs. When they reached the back door of the company building, Jamaica reached out and grabbed the handle, opening it and standing aside for Emily. She gave him a little curious side-eye before stepping through the doorway and into the warm, dry company area, hearing the light zoop of the strange umbrella powering down behind her. Besides Ogledock resting his forehead on his desk, only Muriel and Yorpuya were awake in the seating area, while Targe was passed out on the ground with his head on a pillow. Judging from the strategically placed ice packs on his neck and shoulders, Emily guessed he must have pulled a few muscles while riding in the sidecar. Ogledock eventually made his way to bed himself, as well as the rest of the office staff, but the changeling did not make eye contact with Emily. She didn't mind, as she understood that how he may be feeling after the thrashing by Tootie. For the night, she hung out with Yorpuya and Muriel, the three of them deciding to watch Full Metal Jacket while munching on popcorn and whatever else Yorpuya decided to pull out of the pantry. It was a skill that both Emily and Muriel marveled at, since it mattered little what she shoved in her mouth or how much, as her little harpy body digested everything with ease. Emily knew that if she tried such a maneuver, it would not only cost her lithe figure, but maybe a few years off her life as well. She had never really had a night where she could watch a movie with girlfriends and enjoy herself, as she never really clicked with anyone at her old job, or really met other people in general. She couldn't help but laugh on the inside as she tossed some popcorn into her mouth. Then she looked at the two beside her, Muriel, who was on her 5th can of beer, and Yorpuya, who had devoured half a box of strawberry Pop-Tarts, were a bit extra when it came to the term of girlfriends, as they were only part girl in the first place. But Emily felt right at home. Full Metal Jacket came to an end, and as Emily whistled the Mickey Club song, she popped in a copy of Stripes on DVD. The two off-worlders had never seen the flick and were quite excited to see something new. Yorpuya clicked into the kitchen to wrangle more snacks from the cabinets, and grabbed another case of Dragon's Milk Stout for Muriel. When everyone had settled in, Yorpuya leaned against Emily with her tub of cheese balls, and Muriel folded her front centaur legs in such a way that Emily could rest on them with a pillow underneath. On screen, the new recruits were getting their hair cut, and John Candy was looking aghast. Yorpuya piped up from Emily's chest. "Yorpuya met that man once, this Mr. Murray. He stole my smoothie while driving in Arizona and said no one would believe me." Muriel looked down at Yorpuya. "You too? He deadass asked me if he could ride me to the liquor store once when I was doing recovery in Las Vegas. He kept following me around and just saying weird stuff like the game was being rigged from the start, or this place was so hot it made him wish for a nuclear winter. He was such a strange guy. Thought he was some kind of weird homeless person, not an actor." "That sounds like Bill," Emily said flatly, and both her couchmates seemed to be unsettled by the lack of surprise in her voice. By the time the main cast were driving around the tactical RV, Muriel was snoring drunkenly over Emily while Yorpuya was sleeping in her lap, her lips orange from cheese powder, a single crunchy orb still clutched in her wing claws. Emily idly stacked Muriel's empty beer cans while watching the movie, then put the lid back on Yorpuya's cheeseball tub. Taj was snoring on the ground, having fallen asleep way before the first movie was even put on. When the movie was finished, with all the hijinks of the motley crew having found their end, Emily switched the TV over to the news. Yopuya was now curled up on her for warmth, while Maril was fully leaning into her. She was pretty sure the centaur was drooling into her hair, and puffed a loose strand of Maril's ponytail out of her face. Emily was plenty sleepy, kinda drunk from stealing beers from Maril, was warm from Yopuya's wings, and Maril's chest would make as good a pillow as any. She leaned against the centaur and snuggled into her the same way Yopuya was to her, and fell asleep again quite quickly to the droning of the news anchor. The nightmares came, just as they always did, but their punch was lessened by the warm bodies around her. When she came face to face with the memory of the flesh mound, Emily awoke slightly, feeling Maril's arms come around her and drag both her and the harpy to her. She had to wiggle her head a bit to get some air access, but fell back asleep just as quickly as she woke up. After this, the nightmare subsided, and instead she had more of a neutral dream. It was a bit weird, where Bill Murray was the river nymph from the past and tried to talk her into giving him her boots, but it was definitely better than the alternatives. Morning came bright and early, the rain clouds from the night before pushed aside by strong winds, and a beam of the stuff was at a perfect angle to attack Emily's eyes. Emily got the hint and blinked blearily from Maril's soft chest, yawning and smacking her lips. The aftertaste of cheese balls, stout, and sleep had concocted a foul formula on her taste buds, and she desperately desired to burn the stuff off of her tongue. Unwinding herself from the steel grip of Maril, Emily sat up, stretching widely and listening to the crackle and pop of her muscles. Yopuya was still attached to her like a baby koala, and it took a bit more doing to dislodge. When she finally got the little harpy's claws off her, she set Yopuya back down onto the couch and tossed a blanket over her. Now that she was awake, she could see that a lot of the harpy was now orange instead of her usual gray and black, and knew that she would have one hell of a shower to take. Thinking on the subject, she opened her phone and inspected her own hair, and found that indeed Maril had been drunkenly drooling into her crimson locks. A hot shower was in order, and Emily saw with dismay that Yopuya had been chewing on her while she slept. There were little red fang marks all over her stomach and hip, and she barked out a short laugh when she took off her shirt to find him. Little monster even wants to eat in her sleep. Scrubbing Maril's slobber out of her hair was a bit of a do, but eventually Emily left clean and toweled off, then attacked her head with a hairdryer so she wouldn't spend the entire morning feeling damp. When she walked by the desk to grab fresh clothes, she could hear her key jamming out softly to another tune, recognizing it as O du schöne Westerwald. The key even did the whistles as best it could, and Emily couldn't help but softly sing along with the weird little thing. In terms of weirdness, the little key was definitely getting up there on the ladder, as she found that if she didn't let it listen to music every day, it was harder to get a hold of in her pocket. She swore that the days where she forgot to drop it in earbud, she could feel it moving around in her pocket when she went to grab it, avoiding her grabbing fingers as best it could. When she did get her hands on it, it would fight against the hole in the lock like a dog trying to avoid the bathtub. After this happened a couple of times, she went and bought a second-hand Zune to keep in her pocket, just so the damn thing could jam out to its heart's content when she was motoring. Pouting out of her room barefoot and jamming a shoe between the door and its frame, she made her way down the hallway and back into the company area. Targe was still asleep on the floor, and Emily decided she would take pity on the half-orc, changing out his ice packs and putting his old ones back in the freezer. The new cold must have woken him because she heard him thickly mutter, "Thank you," from his pillow on the ground, and she gave him a few pats on the rump. "No problem, killer." After that, she moved over to the cheeseball dust-covered harpy and the empty beer can-laden centaur. Yopuya was a little easier to roust, as Emily just had to shake her a little to wake her up. The harpy stretched out her wings and smacked her orange lips before closing her eyelids and sitting on the couch, working her way through the post-wake-up zombie brain. Emily took the time to point out the gnaw marks on her hip and stomach, and Yopuya just laughed tiredly, rubbing out her eye with her ring claw. "Sorry about that. I was dreaming of meat buffet." Emily tossed a pillow that had fallen on the ground at her, and it bounced off the harpy's tired face. While Yopuya giggled, Emily chided her. "Well, girl, I ain't a damn buffet, so keep your chewers off me." Getting Maril up and around was a task far larger than Yopuya, to quite a degree. The centaur had drunk a lot of beer, and Emily cleared at least 30 cans from out and around the snoring Maril. No matter how much she pushed or tugged on Maril, rustled her hair, or even smooshed her cheeks, she would not wake, and continued to saw the morning wood away. Emily had worked up a minor sweat trying to wake the centaur, a few strands of her loose hair sticking to her face. After much trial, Emily eventually gave up, defeated, dropping one of Maril's legs with a defiant growl and pushing her hair back over her ears. She stood in front of the centaur, hands on hips, and glared down at the human portion. In one last desperate attempt to wake her, Emily reached down and slapped one of Maril's large breasts, then stood poised for the bodily eruption she expected. Nothing greeted her but a light snort, and then more snoring.
Are you kidding me?
Emily gasped, exasperated, before she heard Yopuya laugh. She watched the harpy lean in and give Maril's ample chest a few slaps as well with her wing, then looking at the lack of reaction on the centaur's face.
How much did she drink?
Probably enough to store in that stupid rack of hers for later, Emily said grumpily, before pulling on the hem of her shirt to get some cool air onto her flesh. Yopuya wasn't finished, and began smooshing Maril's cheeks, moving them up and down. The centaur's full lips plumped comically and squished along with her cheeks.
Maril, it's morning. Wake up.
Yoy, do you want a latte? Emily looked down at Tarj, gave him a little nudge with her foot, and the half-orc raised a thumbs up in affirmation to the question as well. Emily looked over to Yopuya and saw that she was continuing to squish Maril's face, making her lips move and mimicking talking as she responded to Emily.
Yes, I would like latte, please.
She stared on, blinking, as Yopuya continued to smoosh and pull on Maril's face. And she hoped that the centaur wouldn't wake up like that, or else Harpy would be learning to fly for a second time. Into a wall. The sultry smell of espresso was enough to rouse Tarj from the ground, and he sauntered over while still holding an ice pack to his neck. The squalling shriek of the stem and a tactfully placed cup of milk was the ticket to getting Maril up, and the centaur lurched to life with a start, Yopuya dangling below, giggling, and still holding on around her neck.
Oh, what? What was that noise? Yoy, what are you... Did I sleep on a beer can or something? Why do my boobs hurt?
Maril rubbed at her chest, confused, while Yopuya released her grip and fell to the couch, bouncing up and off in a fluid motion to go and pester Emily for her latte. Emily tilted the cup back into its proper position and finished heating up the milk, dishing it out to both Yopuya and Tarj. In the background, Maril stood up to the clatter of more beer cans and shook herself while still rubbing at her wounded flesh. She squinted and glared around, clearly hungover, and wobbled a bit on her hoofs as she moved around the couch. She brushed at her shirt, rubbed her fingers together, then pulled out the hem of it to look down at the many orange streaks on the front of her t-shirt.
What the... Oh man, it's even on my face! Who the hell was eating cheese balls? The shit! There's even Pop-Tart in my hair. You!
Maril pointed at the innocent-looking Yopuya, who was standing near Emily and sipping from her favorite horror movie mug. It was not a hard mystery to solve, as one look at the harpy held enough blatant evidence. Her wings were still dusted in cheese particles, and her face was still orange. The same bits of Pop-Tart were in her hair as well. Maril stared down at the harpy, and her tail swished angrily.
Did you use me as a bowl again?
Yopuya shook her head, then slurped loudly from her mug while eyeing Maril the same way she eyed her. The gesture was ill-advised, as a huge wad of foam hit the back of her throat, and she began to cough and laugh, breaking the stern look as quickly as she put it on. Emily pulled out a jug of carrot cake flavoring and a small bottle of whiskey, wiggling the bottle at Maril.
I'll be sure to make yours extra strong,
as a thanks for being my pillow for the night. Maril wrinkled her nose and rubbed at her sore chest again.
Probably your big nugget of a head that made me sore then. Yeah, fine. I'm gonna go shower real quick and get all this damn cheese dust off me.
She clopped away down the hallway, still angrily swishing her tail from side to side and muttering about how Yopuya was a little kitten. Yopuya held her mug in one hand and made mocking slapping gestures with her wing, her mouth making the accompanying sounds to go with.
Emily raised her foot and stabbed her toe into Yapuya's butt cheek, clicking the portafilter into place. You keep pestering her and she's gonna throw you in a trash can or something. Yapuya didn't respond, just swatting at Emily's foot and clicking her way over to the couch. When Maril had showered and put on fresh clothes, a huge steaming mug was waiting for her, and Emily had drawn a hairy dog in the foam. Maril didn't get it, and Emily had to explain what the reference was. Whiskey is made from dogs? Maril asked, aghast, but still took a sip from the mug. Emily waved a hand, now moving on to her own mug. No, it's just a saying from way back when. If I lick a dog's coat, will that cure my hangover? Both Tarj and Emily looked over at Maril, looks of confusion and disgust on their faces, causing Maril to clear her throat and stomp her hoof softly. I was joking?
Please don't lick a dog's fur, Maril,
Tarj said, and he seemed to be genuinely afraid for the dogs. I said I was joking, jeez. Maybe Emily needs to take you for another spin in that sidecar to loosen you up some more. Tarj got a 1,000-yard stare and clutched the ice pack to his neck. And Emily swore she heard him whisper,
"No sidecar,"
to himself, just barely under audible range. With her own coffee in hand, Emily leaned back against the counter, holding the mug near her face. It's not very nice to tease the poor half-orc gentleman. Look at that face. Does that look like a roller coaster fanatic face to you? Tarj looked from Emily to Maril, and Maril squinted at him, the hangover vein in her forehead pulsing. Nah, more like an evening with a book and tea kind of face.
Bold words coming from someone who has trouble walking upstairs,
Tarj murmured, this time loud enough that even Yapuya could hear from the couch. Maril stomped, this time not as softly. They're spaced for regular feet. It's not my fault it fucks up my gait and I have to baby step them every time. Tarj swirled the contents of his mug, while angrily smiling at Maril.
Little stupid baby hoofs clip-clopping all over the place, and you're giving me guff for not liking Emily trying to kill me.
Maril suddenly clutched her neck, making a dramatically pained face. Oh, my neck! Quick, Yoy, grab me the ice picks! Oh, my strong, orcish yet weakly human joints and spine! That sidecar came out of nowhere! Yapuya laughed from the couch, and Emily just sat back and watched the exchange. Maril and Tarj growled out insults to each other at rapid machine gun-like pace, and frankly, Emily was learning a lot about the two this way. Apparently, Tarj likes to sleep with stuffed animals, the bigger the better, and Maril almost hurled her mug at Tarj when he pointed out that she hadn't had a proper date in months. When Maril brought up that Tarj's ass was rounder than most human women, he became highly defensive, pointing out that his workout regimen was nothing to sneeze at, and squats were a large part of it. In a counter-thrust, he barked that at least his ass could fit through doors without getting stuck. Emily giggled into her coffee when they both began arguing who could lift more weight, and she had to step in between the two. All right, you two, shake your dicks. This pissing contest has been going on for too long. Besides, Tarj, there's nothing wrong with being able to bounce a quarter off that thing. And Maril, there is no point in pointing out how much weight you can pull. You have 2 more legs and 200 pounds on Tarj. Ogledock came around the corner, drinking from a bottle of water and holding a small cluster of folders. These two being stupid again? Yup, Yapuya called out, still not having taken a shower. Yoy, you stink. Go take a shower. Tarj, you sing in the bath, and Maril, you drool when you sleep. Both of you can shut up. Anomalies are cropping up around Las Vegas again, and Paradise Valley is heating back up with a new saltwater surge. Tarj, Yoy, I'm sending you to Paradise Valley. Maril, Emily, I'm sending you to Las Vegas. Maril blanched and leaned in towards Emily. Do you think that Bill Murray will be there again? He's very persistent, and he always seems to find me. Don't worry, I'll keep him from razzle-dazzling you, Emily said reassuringly, patting Maril on the arm. Ogledock looked from Emily to Maril, eyebrows low as Yapuya ran off to a room in the distance. Were you two watching Stripes? I apologize for your eardrums in advance. No, sir! Maril said, mimicking the line from the movie, while Emily raised a horrible salute with her mug. Emily leaned back, growling out, We were training, sir! Ogledock lowered his eyelids. You two need better taste in movies. Marill, are you fine with shooting in? Ooh, do I get to ride the Fairchild again?
Ogleduck flipped up a few sheets of paper. No, I have a C-130 down, but I can probably get Cherie to take you up again. Marill clapped her hands together happily, having set down her mug at the prospect of going airborne again.
Oh, please! A Fairchild has a front-end cargo door and I can just step out of it. The C-130s have the ramp, and man, those things freak me out.
Alright, I'll give her a call then. Probably needs the money anyway. Emily, you'll be dropping in with your motorbike. I know Cherie has a cargo chute and platform for it. Emily's smile was frozen on her face as Marill bounced from hoof to hoof next to her.
Right. That should be just fine, I bet.
Good, you'll be heading off tomorrow in the morning, and should be dropped off outside Las Vegas around the afternoon, I'd reckon. Unless Cherie has something else that needs done. You'll be jumping in with Marill. We use standard infantry chutes packed by Jametia. Static line deployed with reserve chute just in case. There will also be a small cargo drop with everything you need, including some company funds. Emily's face was beginning to go white, but she still held her tone.
Sounds great. I'll go pack, I guess.
Emily was terrified of heights. She always had been, ever since she was a little girl, and was a firm believer of having your feet firmly on the ground. There was, however, a little problem of her talking herself up while on stream, and may have let slip that she was an avid parachutist in order to impress her fans and try to get more street cred, and in that case, more donation. Standing on a mildly tall diving board was enough to cause her a panic. The thought of diving out a fucking plane was about to make her flop on the ground and hug it. Marill was over the moon at the prospect, and was busily storming around her room, packing everything she needed for the morning trip and whistling what Emily recognized was an airborne cadence known as Blood on the Risers. Emily knew the song, and she thought the lyrics over in her head. She grabbed her rucksack and began to break out in a cold sweat.
The canopy became this shroud he hurled to the ground, and he ain't gonna jump no more,
Emily whispered, clutching the metal locker with a white-knuckled hand. Ogleduck had given her this job because he thought she was an experienced shootist, and there were more smaller white lies she had told on stream, like knowing how to tie knots or cold weather survival. If she backed down now, what would that mean? Would he think she was a liar and fire her? Would he make fun of her and make her lose face? The money was too good in this line of work, and she really wanted to keep that kind of money coming in. For a brief moment, she considered seducing him in order to convince him to let her drive there. But what would everyone else think of her if she did that? They clearly remembered the weaknesses of their fellow divers. What would they think if they knew she wanted to hurl when going up elevators with more than 4 floors? She looked up into the small, dirty mirror that was attached to the door of her locker, and her own terrified eyes stared back. She also saw the looming shadow of Marill, who scooped her up in a chokehold of a hug, her face planted solidly in her chest as she swung Emily around. "We're going up into the sky, Emily!" "Oh, I haven't been on a drop in so long. I can't wait. I bet you can't wait to get back up there either. Ogleduck said you mentioned in your streams that you could never afford to go back up. Now we're getting paid to. The rush is something else, ain't it?" Marill was eager to get up and then jump out of the damn plane, acting as if they were going on a free trip to an amusement park. Emily clutched at her, not out of excitement, but out of terror at the very prospect. While Emily tried to keep her panic attack at bay, Marill offered to help her pack, hopping from side to side, hoofs to hoofs, while tossing Emily's clothes and spare boots into a rucksack for her. Emily did her best to breathe, and her best not to think of just how high that plane was going to be. "Be brave, Emily," she thought to herself. "Be brave for the money." And that was the end of Chapter 4. Part 1. Maybe. Your guess is as good as mine. Anyway, the reason why I'm recording this outro at all is because our dear, dirty gingerbread man friend had to have his microphone break just as he was finishing up editing. So now I'm here to say goodbye to all of you. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you ever feel like it. And if you don't, shame on you. Anyway, goodbye. See you next week.
All